Welcome to the AP Bootcamp Scientific Writing Session, CER, Claims, Evidence, and Reasoning Workout Plan. The lesson overview for this session includes learning the framework for answering scientific questions through CER, Claims, Evidence, and Reasoning, learning how free response questions can help you get to the answer, finding your answer in the question, learning strategies and tips for answering free response questions, and learning how to integrate CER into your free response answers. There are some materials that you will need for this session, so if you do not have those materials in front of you already, please go back to the AP Bootcamp course page on Canvas and pull up the slide deck for the CER workout plan. And on that slide deck, you're going to find all the links that are associated with this lesson for you to be able to move forward with it successfully. You're going to find on that slide deck the CER videos. You'll find the CER PowerPoints, the CER articles, and the CER worksheets for this session. By now, you should have your materials ready for the CER workout plan session, which means that you have the slide deck up for the T on answering free response questions and the guided notes that accompany that slide deck. You also have the other links open and ready for the CER worksheet, the CER article, and also the CER videos ready to go so that you can move through this session freely and smoothly. So now we're going to start with free response questions because you have to know what free response questions are and what's required of you in those in order to be successful with using the CER strategy, which is the claims, evidence, and reasoning strategy. And it's a strategy often used in answering scientific questions. And so the free response questions are those questions that will be on your AP exam that are open-ended, and they require you to answer the question in essay or paragraph format. And so a lot of students are intimidated by answering free response questions, but this session is to put you at ease with some of the techniques and strategies that work well for you to be successful in answering free response questions. Let's get you teed up on free response questions. As mentioned earlier, free response questions are questions that are open-ended, and you will be expected to answer those questions in paragraph or essay form on your AP exam. So one of the things to keep in mind is that free response questions are also essay style in how they are posed to students on the exam. So you must read the entire question before trying to answer. And I know that it is tempting to go at the end of everything that is being said in the question and then try to jump to an answer. But it's best that you read the entire question before you start to answer. And we'll talk a little more in this session as to why that is important. Reading an entire free response question will allow you to make note of key terms and concepts you recognize from class. So that's why it is important that you read the entire question before answering, because reading the entire question will allow you to pinpoint things that you know, that you're familiar with, that could help you get to the answer for the question. So it's imperative that you read the entire question so that you can identify those things that are important for you to know in getting to your answer. So once you have read the free response question in its entirety, identified the key terms and key concepts from class, and made a note of those, you should move forward with identifying the action words within a free response question, or what the question is asking you to do, and specifically what the question is asking you to do for you to be able to arrive to an answer. And so there are 5 key action words that you should be familiar with when you are answering a free response question. And we're going to start with the word identify. Identify is when we associate things with a particular concept or key term. And we're going to use the mitochondria as an example in this video lesson because most of you are familiar with that cell organelle. And so when we think of the mitochondria, when we identify it, we think about things that would be associated with such as ATP production. We think of energy, we think of cellular respiration, and we think of cells because the mitochondria is actually a cell organelle. And so those are the things that are associated with the mitochondria, and therefore we have identified the mitochondria. The next word that you need to be familiar with is going to be describe. And describe is when we think of the characteristics that are associated with a particular concept or key term. And so some of the characteristics that would be associated with the mitochondria is that it has its own DNA, that it has an inner and an outer membrane. It has an inner membrane space. It has folded membranes. And so those are the ways in which we would describe the mitochondria. And then when we explain, that's the next term that you need to be familiar with. We explain that we bring something to life. We make things more clear. We make it so that people understand exactly what we mean. So when we talk about the inner membrane space, we mean that there is a space within the mitochondria that is on the inside of the organelle. And then we have something called the outer membrane space, and that is going to be on the outside or the outskirts of the mitochondria. So we're explaining, we're bringing it home, we're making it clear as to actually what the words and concepts actually mean. The next action word that you should be familiar with is going to be predict or prediction. And this is something that we will call telling what could possibly happen in the future. So you're looking at more of the cause and effect of things. And so if someone takes in cyanide poisoning, we can predict that their cells will die in the near future. And the reason that we know that is because of the next word. The next word is justify. And that's when we give a support for our prediction. And that should sound familiar to you because we talked about making predictions when we talked about lab reports. And so it should, the light bulb should come on in that when we predict, we also must support our answer or support our concept or support our description or support our explanation. So basically, to justify something is to back up what you say. And so I can make the prediction that cells would die if someone takes in cyanide poisoning is because I know that cyanide as a poison actually stops the enzyme or impedes the enzyme that is responsible for ATP production in the mitochondria. So it basically inhibits the enzyme, so it keeps it from working. And so if your cells are not able to produce ATP, that means the cells do not have energy to do work. And when cells do not have the energy to do work, they die, which is why people die from cyanide poisoning. So that is my justification for my prediction. So those are the 5 key action terms that you need to be familiar with when answering free response questions. So now you have read the question in its entirety. You have identified the key terms and key concepts from class. You have identified the action words, whether you're going to predict, justify, explain, describe, identify whether or not you're going to do those things or what the question is asking you to do. And you've already gathered all the information from the question that could help you arrive to an answer or a solution. And so now what you're going to do is you're going to take all that information. You're going to take the information that you gathered, the key terms that you recognize, the key concepts that you recognize, and all the information that you made a note of, and you're going to make a claim. And so based on that information that you've gathered and the concepts, you're going to make a claim. And a claim is a statement that is factual, that actually can be supported by other information and concepts that you've learned in class or that's provided in the free response question. So a claim is a statement that is factual. So it is factual that cells will die if there is not ATP being produced in the mitochondria. That is factual. And so when you make a claim, it has to be something that can be supported. And so remember when we talked about the benefits of being in an AP course is learning how to argue and get your point across. CER, or claims, evidence, and reasoning, that strategy is actually what is actually used in argumentation. And so I'm going to make the claim and get my point across that cells would die if there is no ATP production in the mitochondria. And so with that being said, once we have made our claim, and this claim is based upon the information covered in class, is based upon the information given in the free response question. Once I've made my claim, then I'm going to utilize that same information, that's those concepts from class, to state the evidence for my claim. And so evidence is, as I mentioned, is the actual support for your claim. You got to back your stuff up. You just can't say something and just throw something out there without stating your evidence or having some type of support for what you're saying. If you want to clearly get your point across in argumentation, you have to be able to actually back your stuff up. And that is really important. So I've made the claim that cells will die if there is not any ATP production in the mitochondria. And so I've said that now I must support my claim. And the support for my claim is that most of the energy in cells is made in the mitochondria. Though we have other places in the cell where ATP is made, most of it is made in the mitochondria. And we can get 36 to 38 ATPs production through cellular respiration in the mitochondria. So it's the most efficient place to make energy. And so the other support for my claim is that when ATP production is shut down in the mitochondria, that means that the cells will not have enough energy to do work. Cells will not have enough energy to do work because the 36 to 38 ATP production is shut down. And it's due to the fact that the electron transport chain has an enzyme in the mitochondria that is responsible for ATP production. And if that enzyme has been inhibited in any way, we will not get the production of ATP. The other support for my claim is that most of the energy for cells is made in the mitochondria, which is why it is called the powerhouse of the cell. So once we have stated our claim and we have given our support for our claim or stated or cited our evidence, we can now draw a conclusion. We can utilize the information gathered and the concepts from class to explain why our evidence supports our claim. So we can make a connection between the claim and the evidence. We can draw a conclusion, or we can do what we call making an inference. And so the inference that can be made is that when there is not enough ATP production in the mitochondria, cells do not have enough energy to do work. And because the cells do not have enough energy to do work, they will die. So the inference is that cells being able to do work is directly tied to the amount of ATP or energy available in the cell. That's an inference. That is an inference. The fact that cells being able to do work is directly tied to the amount of ATP being made in the cells. So if most of the ATP is being made in the mitochondria, then that is going to increase the chances of survival for that cell. And when that ATP production is shut down in the mitochondria, you shut down the life of the cell. Therefore, I can make the claim that if there is not enough ATP production in the mitochondria, then cells will die. So now that you have a general idea of how CER claims, evidence, and reasoning fits into answering a free response question, I am going to move on to a couple other things that you need to be mindful of when answering free response questions. One is that you want to be specific in your answers. Do not generalize your claims, evidence, or reasoning. So basically, you want to be specific about what you are saying in your answer. And so I was very specific in my claim. ATP production, whatever it, basically is where it happens in the mitochondria. And if there is no ATP production in the mitochondria, cells will die. I was very specific. There was no fluff. I made my claim. So you do not want to generalize. You just don't want to say, well, cells will die. That's very general. You have to be specific and tell me what it means for a cell to die. The next thing that you need to be mindful of when answering a free response question is you need to write as though the person who is grading your free response has never heard the information before. No abbreviations, no shortcuts, and no contractions. And so what I'm saying to you is that you don't want to shorten up your words. You don't want to try to take a shortcut to answer or just be general because you figure they'll get it. No, you need to be specific. And if you're going to use the word mitochondria, you need to spell the entire word out. You don't need to try to abbreviate and put a word, an abbreviation like MIT. So that means that I'm trying to talk about the mitochondria. You need to write as though the person who is grading your free response has never seen the word mitochondria before. When I say when I say stay away from contractions, contractions are words like don't, won't, wouldn't. Use the entire word: will not, do not, would not. So that's really important in your scientific writing. The other thing to be mindful when you're writing scientifically and you're answering free response questions is that you should make sure that you go straight to the point. Answer should be straight to the point, no fluff. So as I mentioned when I gave the support for my answer that my claim that cells would die if there's no ATP production in the mitochondria, I specifically went to the point and said that most energy in the cell is made in the mitochondria, and the mitochondria is responsible for ATP or most ATP production. I was very straight to the point. If there's no ATP production in the mitochondria, cells will not have enough energy to do work. That was specific. I have no shortcuts. I have no abbreviations. I did not use any contractions. I went straight to the point, no fluff. And so the other thing that you need to be mindful of is that in most cases, you can answer the question using the question. Pay close attention to what the question is saying. This goes back to reading the question in its entirety. Remember that there will be some key concepts and key terms that you should be able to recognize in the free response question, but also the free response question will give you some information that will help you arrive at the solution or the answer for what the question is asking you to do. Take down that information, gather that information, make a note of it because it could add points to your free response question on your exam. The other thing to be mindful of is stay focused on the question and what the question is telling and asking you to do. Pay attention to the fact that the question may be asking you to predict, that the question may be asking you to explain. The question is asking you to describe. The question is asking you to identify. And whatever the question is asking and telling you to do that and stick with that. Avoid adding things that do not pertain to the question, which means that if it's not the question, the question is not asking you to do it, do not do it. Stick with what the question is asking you to do. The last thing to be mindful of is that a practice makes perfect. So whenever your instructors are assigning you free response questions for homework, do them. Do the free response homework. The more you do it, the more practice you get, the better you will become at answering free response questions in your AP courses, and you will have a better chance of doing well with your free response questions on your AP exam. Doing your homework is really important in AP, and specifically around practicing writing for science. You need to make sure that you're doing it. It will pay off for you. So this wraps up our session on scientific writing through CER, the workout plan. Please know that we're so excited that you decided to join us for this session, and good luck for the rest of the AP boot camp.